Some heavyweights are good, some not so good. A lot of them are just fat.
He's fat!
But there are some that climb to the top of the mountain and can call themselves the undisputed champion and the baddest man on the planet. In this video series, we will travel back in time and witness the evolution of one of the UFC's oldest divisions. This is the history and ranking of the UFC heavyweight champions. Do know we will not be looking in detail at any of the interim champions. This is undisputed only. Our story starts in February 1997 at UFC 12 in Alabama, where for the first time in its history, the UFC would introduce weight classes, with the heavyweight limit being over 200 pounds and the lightweight division being up to 200 pounds. The UFC would also introduce each weight class with a tournament at UFC 12, with the winner being Jerry Bollander for the lightweight division and a young Vitor Belfort winning the heavyweight tournament. But the most important part of the event would be the inaugural UFC heavyweight championship fight between Mark Coleman and Dan Severn. This fight would be a unification bout between the UFC openweight champion, better known as the UFC superfight champion, and the UFC 11 tournament champion. What's crazy is this historic night almost never happened. Initially, UFC 12 was meant to be hosted in Niagara Falls, New York, but due to pressure from politicians such as John McCain, just one day before the event took place, the New York District State Court banned no-holds-barred fighting, with the governor of the state, George Pataki, going as far to say, "I'm not interested in running them out of business, I'm interested in running them out of New York. They have no place in this state." Which is definitely a quote that aged well, right? Definitely. Anyway, the UFC were forced to move to another location. They first tried Oregon, but were banned again, and finally landed in Dothan, Alabama. The fight between Coleman and Severn only lasted one round, with Coleman landing some decent strikes, but when Severn managed to stop the takedown, he got to side control and choked Severn out with a scarf hold headlock, crowning him the first official and undisputed UFC heavyweight champion. It would only be 5 months until we saw Coleman's first title defense against Maurice Smith, who was making his UFC debut and would be part of the age-old mixed martial art debate of striker versus grappler. Smith was coming into this fight with a kickboxing world title, but struggled against grappling in MMA, with losses to Ken Shamrock and Bas Rutten in Pancrase. But he did manage to win the Extreme Fighting heavyweight title though. But with a 5-7 record, the odds were stacked against the kickboxer coming into his fight against Mark Coleman. The fight started as everyone expected, with Coleman getting the takedown early and landing ground and pound, with Smith trying his best to land strikes from his back. However, he showed that he had some knowledge of grappling now, as he was able to prevent himself from taking heavy damage. Smith was on the ground for 9 minutes, but managed to get up, and Coleman showed that he was absolutely gassed. Smith began landing leg kicks, but Coleman got another takedown off a missed kick, but once again, Smith did not give up, and managed to reverse the position and even take Coleman's back before standing up on the feet again, where Smith continued to land big strikes of his own. After 15 minutes of non-stop action, the fight went into overtime. Smith really began dominating, landing huge combinations with leg kicks. Coleman was so tired and was unable to do anything back, which led to him eventually losing the fight and his title by decision. It's time to rank our first heavyweight champion. Coleman showed that he was a really strong wrestler, as he dominated both Smith and Severn, but he was so muscle bound he had no gas tank. Paired that with his poor striking and his 0 title defenses, I think it's only fair to put Mark Coleman in D tier in our heavyweight rankings. Smith's first title defense at UFC 15 was supposed to be against another strong wrestler in Dan Severn, but luckily for Smith, he had to pull out due to injury, leaving Tank Abbott to come in as a replacement. Tank Abbott wasn't known as a high-level fighter when looking at his patchy record, but he did reach the final of the UFC 6 tournament and the final of the Ultimate 96 tournament, losing to Oleg Taktarov and Don Fry respectively. Smith started the fight showing good movement and leg kicks, but got dropped 2 minutes in, allowing Tank to get on top. However, Abbott was nowhere near the level of grappler that Coleman was, and was not able to do anything effective while he was on top, while Smith, on the other hand, nearly got a submission off his back. The fight eventually got brought back to the feet due to inactivity, and Abbott was clearly gassed out. And when he was unable to stop multiple leg kicks from Smith, Big John McCarthy stopped the fight, giving Smith a TKO win and his first title defense. Smith's second title defense would be against Randy Couture at UFC Japan in December 1997. Couture earned his title shot after being on a 3-fight win streak where he would win the UFC 13 heavyweight tournament and beat Vitor Belfort in a title eliminator. The fight would follow the same pattern as Smith's other title fights, with him on his back being dominated while Couture threatened submissions, and this would continue for the whole 15 minutes into the overtime rounds. But what made Couture different to Tank Abbott and Coleman was the fact that he did not gas out and would continue to dominate Smith to a majority decision, ending Smith's title reign, although at the time the win was seen as very controversial. Smith would be an early example of why good fitness was so important in the heavyweight division, as well as how surviving against the common ground and pound at the time was a key to win any MMA match. However, due to not evolving his own grappling capabilities, it was only a matter of time until Smith ran out of luck and faced an energy-efficient grappler. His title reign puts him at C tier in our list. Randy Couture's first defense was set to be against former Pancrase champion Bas Rutten, but Couture had chosen to sign with Vale Tudo Japan, and because of contract disputes, he was stripped of his heavyweight belt, and the next fight for the belt would be between Bas Rutten and Kevin Randleman. At the moment of UFC 20, Bas Rutten was one of the best fighters in the world. He was on a 20-fight undefeated streak with 19 wins and 1 draw. 17 of those wins were finishes, and he was the king of Pancrase. On the other side, there was Kevin Randleman, and what he lacked in MMA experience, he would make up for in his strong wrestling and pure physique. I mean, just look at this guy. Pre-USADA was crazy, right? The fight started and Randleman got the early takedown and managed to cut open Rutten with ground and pound. Despite the fight being brought back to the feet multiple times to check on the cut, Randleman would continue to dominate with his wrestling. Rutten showed a little more offense in the overtime rounds, but the majority of the fight, it was all Randleman with complete control. However, the judges on the night thought differently, and Rutten won the fight via split decision, much to the annoyance of Randleman and his team, and some of the members of the crowd were booing, chanting bullshit at the decision that was made. Due to injuries, Rutten would vacate the title, and would only have one more MMA fight, ending his career with a respectable record of 28 wins, 4 losses, and 1 no contest. But if we had to rank Bas Rutten's title reign in the heavyweight division, it would only get a D tier. This is due to having 0 title defenses, and also due to the fact that his performance to win the belt against Randleman just wasn't that convincing, and I think the crowd knew that too, and maybe deep down Bas got away lucky. But I think overall a D ranking is completely fair. Randleman would get his second chance at the title at UFC 23 when he went up against Pete Williams. Pete Williams was a member of Ken Shamrock's Lion's Den, one of the first dominant fight camps in MMA history, and had produced a number of champions and tournament winners, including Ken and Frank Shamrock, Guy Mezger, Jerry Bolander, and former heavyweight champion Maurice Smith. Pete was coming into this fight having recently got a win over Mark Coleman by head kick KO. The fight mainly consisted of Randleman using his dominant wrestling with very little resistance from Williams, aside from a few submission attempts, allowing Randleman to finally get the heavyweight title. Randleman's first title defense would be against Pedro Hizo. Hizo came into this fight undefeated, with most of his wins coming via KO or TKO due to his kickboxing background. His notable wins included KOing Tank Abbott and a split decision over Mark Coleman. The fight was a boring affair, however, with both men not showing much action, with Randleman landing a takedown and controlling the first round, and Hizo managed to get some offense going towards the end of the second and third. Aside from a Hizo head kick in the third, neither fighter were close to finishing this fight. Randleman defended his belt with a decision win. It was so boring, people were throwing trash in the octagon, and things did not look good for the heavyweight championship. But on the horizon lurked the old king, ready to reclaim his crown. This is part 1 in a heavyweight history. If you liked it, please leave a like. It's my first video. It's my first attempt at this kind of thing. So if you liked it, or disliked it, all feedback is appreciated. Follow me on my Twitter, that's in the description. Subscribe as well, and look forward to the next part coming soon. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video, whatever that may be.